So this video is a continuation of the video from last week where I talked about the way that I conceptualize trauma as moving through time in different ways. So if you're interested in sort of seeing what that one was about, I'll provide a link somewhere. I hope you can find it. It'll be somewhere. Um, probably probably on the side and in the description. Those are the places you'll probably find it. Um, Anyhow, today we're going to be talking about the different adaptive behaviors we can pick up as a result of trauma and sort of how those become just harmful to us over time as we get further away from the initial cause of the trauma. So, yeah, so first we'll talk about fight. And so first we'll talk about when that's so for each of these. First we'll talk about when something is helpful, when it's useful, and then we'll talk about like sort of what a little more details about it, and then we'll talk about like how it can be hurtful later, and sort of like yeah, with a little bit at the end about like sort of what to do with that. So fighting. So if you have also all of these like there aren't like clear delineations between oh I'm always this one or oh like this one is in this situation like you might have multiple, they might show up in different situations or even in the same situation, depending on how you're feeling. So yeah, don't get too caught up in like saying like identify with this one instead of these ones. It's more so about like these are different ways that trauma can show up, trauma adaptive responses, and yeah, and like you can sort of like focus on this one. This is something I relate to, so this is something I want to sort of be thinking about and working through. So a fight response obviously can be helpful if you're in like a high intensity, physical, stressful situation. Let's say you got to, you know, let's say you got swept. Let's say you're swimming out on the beach, you get swept away by a current. A fight response would be, you know, all of your energy, you're swimming against the current, and you get to shore. That's an example of a fight response. Or let's say like someone who's like a foot bigger than you is threatening you. You know, maybe you fight them off. Um, so fight can be helpful in certain situations. And the thing about fight response is if we don't let out the energy that our body is giving us to try to resolve the issue that it feels like we have to fight it, um, we hold on to that tension. It's like a spring that like you squish the spring so it has all this energy that's like waiting to like spring out but it never does. So you're just like that spring that like has all this potential energy, but it's just like stuck inside of you. And that can have really harmful effects on your health over time, as well as on your relationships. So what are some signs of this? Um, if you have anxiety, panic attacks, and you can't necessarily identify the source, or it feels like it's like much greater of a response and the source in the moment necessarily might feel like it deserves compared to how other people respond. Also, anger, rage. If you don't know where those things are coming from, that's a fight trauma response. Your emotions are trying to tell you that you were harmed and you wanted to fight back, but due to circumstances, you couldn't. You know, this happens because people are in different situations where they have a lot of social power or where you don't have any physical power to fight back. And so all of this anger gets stored as like a message of like this bad thing happened to me and I couldn't do anything about it. Um, Also, this might show up as fighting in relationships and making up, like very like high intensity relationships, swinging to one extreme or the other. It's like a fight response because you're unable to settle to like a calm homeostasis. Um, so that's fight, how it can be helpful, and then how over time it can be less helpful. Um, so again, I'm going to go through these and then we'll talk at the end about what we can do about them. So next is flight. Um, you know, flight is another adaptive response. So you imagine if you're being chased by a bear and you got to run away. Flight would be very helpful in that situation. Or let's say you're in a place and there's war, or there's a famine, or there's disease, and it's too big of a situation for you to personally address. So the best way to ensure your survival is just to get away. For as long as people have existed, we have been like fleeing circumstances that are too big for one person to deal with, and that's the only way people survive. And that's why, um, like migration is a result of this, and migration can be a good thing. Um, so yeah, we want to welcome refugees with open arms because um, that's the right thing to do. I'm just going to say that, and we'll get back to flight. Um, so over time, if you are caught in a loop of always fleeing the stressors of life, whether that's from stuff in your past or stuff that you're currently going through, that can look like dissociation or the separation of your mind from your body. Like that's what I really think of when I think of dissociation, is like your body's here and your mind is going way over there. And think about that as being something adaptive. Imagine that you have no power in a situation whatsoever and you are not present or aware for something that's happening. You actually might experience less trauma that way than if you had stayed present and fully experienced what was happening. It becomes problematic when this is your normal, where your mind is way over here and your body's here. It can be very hard to connect those two things again. Um, so, daydreaming also is a form of dissociation. Dissociation itself is not inherently bad or wrong. There's nothing wrong with you for doing this or any of the things I'm talking about today. Um, but yeah, daydreaming is a form of dissociation and can also become harmful to your life if you find yourself doing it all the time. Um, we also have suicidal ideation as a form of flight. If your problems or stressors in your life feel completely overwhelming and unmanageable to deal with, and you have no way to address them or even to get away from them, that suicide starts to feel like this is how you can get away. Um, and it makes sense. In circumstances like this, it makes sense to think about suicide. It does. However, when you're in this state of wanting to get away and being like so heightened stress all the time, your judgment can be impaired in the sense that things feel more permanent than they are and that you have less power than you do sometimes. So, um, I'm not going to talk in depth about suicide in this episode or in this video. I think that can maybe be a topic for another day. But what I will say is like um, to do whatever you can to get away from your current circumstances, to change your situation, because those things which feel permanent, they will pass, or they can pass in theory. So, um, you know, save that decision for a time when your situation feels more manageable. Because that impulse to run away is a good one for you, but maybe this isn't the right way to run away. Um, One other topic on flight I wanted to address is the use of substances or repetitive behaviors, or even like people jumping into intimate relationships to flee from their feelings or their history of pain. Um, I think that the use of things that feel good to flee what feels bad um, is something to be aware of. And again, um, this is not anything to feel bad about. I think it's very natural and adaptive in many situations for people to do this stuff. And I have experiences with a lot of these, including the one I just mentioned, in my own history. So, um, you know, especially in the society we live in, that we sometimes have to do these things in order to survive our environments. That's okay. The next is freeze. So, freeze is fight, flight, freeze. Freeze is, being unable to do things. If you have, you know, something that's really important that needs to get done, but it just feels like completely insurmountable, overwhelming to start doing that thing. That's a freeze response. If you are sleeping a lot, like if your primary response to something that's stressful and overwhelming is to say, I need to sleep, and then you just find that over the next few days, you're sleeping 9, 10, 12 hours a day or more, um, but it doesn't feel restful. It doesn't feel like you're actually getting rest from that sleep, but your body's just shutting down. That's a freeze response. Also, this expression like deer in headlights, that's a fear response. So fear can be adaptive, or freeze can be adaptive in the sense of like when deer freeze, their predators see them by motion. So when deer freeze, it's maybe the predator can't see them anymore. And so that can save their life as if they freeze in the right moments. Similarly, sometimes when we freeze, it can stop a situation that in motion, if it had continued, something bad would have happened. Whereas if we freeze, maybe that gives us some time to like assess our options. That's really what freeze can do at its best is it gives us the time to stop and reflect about our options. And this doesn't have to be like you spend days or months or years reflecting about your best decisions. This can be like a couple seconds of quick decision making that you freeze and you're thinking very quickly and then you can do something. Um, I think sometimes freeze can be less helpful when we simply don't have much control. Like maybe we have two bad options, or maybe we are told to do something by people who have more power than us. That we can then freeze because we don't want to have to make those decisions, or we don't want to follow through on whatever it is we're told. So yeah, free. That's freeze. Um, Next we have fawn, which may be a little less common in terms of what people tend to talk about, but I think it's very common in terms of the way we act. So, fawning is adaptive in the sense that you are keeping yourself safe by um, managing how people are feeling and how they're treating you. So, if when someone's angry, they take that out on you in a very harmful way. So, it would be to your benefit for them not to be angry, right? Um, Fawning um, can be very adaptive in the sense of a young person or a child who has very volatile parents or caregivers, in the sense that you're taking care of their needs because you've picked up on their triggers when they haven't. So you're taking care of their needs to make sure that they're not taking their anger or frustration or rage out on you. Similarly, I think of like police, prisons, um, people who have to deal with them. These people often have a lot of anger and rage and too much power. And so by fawning, maybe we can keep them from taking out all of that pain and anger and rage on us. Now, sometimes it doesn't work because it's very difficult to hold them accountable and they just want to do it anyway. But when our initial response is to sort of say, "Oh, how are you?" and to sort of like lighten the mood, we're fawning. And we should not have to do this. If police, if their job was actually to help keep us safe, we wouldn't have to fawn around them. But yeah, so fawn might look like difficulty with boundaries. So if you really are heavily picking up on people, how they're feeling around you, and you're thinking of like, I got to take care of this so that they're feeling this way. I got to, all this stuff. Like this is how this can come up. The lack of boundaries. I think of like the phrase HSP or highly sensitive person that is connected to fawning in that like you're hyper vigilant in the sense that you are very clued in to your environment and to the people in your environment to sort of manage what's going on. And then since you're attuned to that, then you're taking care of them. You're maybe neglecting your own stuff, your own emotions, your own self, because effectively you've merged with this person and it's more to your benefit to take care of them first for whatever reason. Um, And another one of these, which I'll mention, is comedy. Like if you're like the class clown or the person who likes to make people laugh, um, that can be a fawning response because laughter is good. If people are happy, if they're laughing at something you say, then they're not angry at you or they're not frustrated in the same way. So I think like if you really like comedy, that might be connected to fawn responses. So these are all the four different adaptive types of adaptive behaviors. So last piece I wanted to talk about is physical symptoms, how this stuff can come out, and what's called psychosomatics. So I think there's a bit of a misconception that psychosomatics is all in your head. Like if you're having some painful experiences and, you know, doctors can't find a reason or, you know, people are disbelieving of what you're experiencing. It's like, oh, you're making that up for attention. People tend to say things like this. But what actually happens is, I talked earlier about how anger can erupt and we don't always know where that's coming from. And also this metaphor of the spring, which is like just kept tightly, like ready to spring out, but it never does. That energy, when it's stored in our bodies over time, can result in like permanent health problems. And this is actually a lot more common than we might think because here's how I think of it. We have all of this pent up energy that never gets out. And we have a lot of pain associated with that. So we can't ever like go and interrogate the root of where that's coming from because it never feels safe to do that. If we're in that situation, that can come out in our body because that's essentially like stress sitting in your body is um, it's like that state of constant tension and it's like constant tiny little wounds in our body. Like when people say trauma lives in the body, what they mean is, or what I conceptualize that as is um, just constant little inflammation. Yeah. Pain and inflammation in our body as a result of constantly being in a state of hypervigilance and unable to rest. So that tension comes out as what was the word I just used? Um, that tension comes out as inflammation. And that inflammation can cause so many different health issues. Some examples based on my own experiences or people I've known personally, not my clients, but people I've known in my personal life, because I'm not going to use my clients as examples here. But yeah, people I've known, migraines, bowel problems, chronic pain, um, like arthritis, um, PCOS, yeah, also like a lot of like nervous conditions. I myself had a nervous condition, and maybe I'll talk more about that at some point. But um, trauma is debilitating in our bodies when we don't pause and stop and address the root of it. It comes out in our bodies because it has nowhere else to go. So, yeah, so okay. If you see yourself in any of the 4 different types of adaptive behaviors I mentioned, or in the physical symptoms and psychosomatics, what can you do? Well, number one thing you can do, if you're able to, is to slow down your life and rest from the things which are causing you stress, to start to open up these old wounds and process and grieve. And I'm not going to get too into that because I'll talk more in depth about grieving and what that entails soon. Um, but yeah, to really take time away from those things causing you stress, to let open these previous wounds, and to really get to the root of where does this hurt come from? And I think also like slowly working on shifting these behaviors or shifting these things which are adaptive for situations you're no longer in, right? Um, and the piece I want to mention, which is the role of society, is we often don't have the time to stop and heal because we have to keep working, because we got bills to pay, because we have people who depend on us. Um, and systems of oppression don't let us take the time away from them, right? We talked in the last video about complex trauma. Um, it's not so easy to heal from these things as it could be in a society where we prioritized it. So again, I'm going to point to the importance of revolution in us actually being able to heal from all of these things which I've mentioned. Because again, these are adaptive, and if we can't leave the situations that they're adaptive for, it's very hard to stop doing those things or to stop being in that mindset because it's keeping us safe still, right? So changing the environment you're in can be one way of shifting this form of being. However, we need a global scale change in environment. So yeah, in the comments below, why don't you share, if you're comfortable with this, why don't you share a little bit about maybe which one of these you related to? Maybe you related to multiple. How do they show up for you? Let me know. And if you like this content, if you want to see more, in particular my discussion about grieving, what that is and what that entails, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you'd like to support me, I have a Patreon linked in my YouTube page, so please check that out. Yeah, see you next time.